Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name's Ivana Hurdenque if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is April the 6th. It is Wednesday, and today I am joined by our columnist, Kyle Whitmire. Kyle's here today to talk about the latest piece in his series, State of Denial, How 150 Years of Whitewashing History Poisons Alabama Today. Now, if you haven't read Kyle's piece that dropped yesterday, we're going to link it here so you can kind of get up to speed with that. But there's a lot of things you talk about, Kyle. I think that we're going to try to break down some of them here. I know that this is a deep concept, but you really talk about the critical race theory kind of ban bill that is being debated right now in the Alabama legislature. And you don't necessarily focus on the educational part of that, which I think is interesting. So many people hear CRT, they immediately go to the classroom and think about the implications there on students. You go at it from a different angle. You talk about the legislators and how this is really deepening the divide between parties.
Well, I mean, one of the things that sort of that led me to write this series was that in the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, 5 or 6 legislative sessions, there's been this sort of bitter turning point. I think I called it an inflection point in the latest piece. And, it's not unusual during legislative sessions for everybody to get in there and it's like the first day of school and everybody's happy to see each other. And then by the end, they all hate each other. That's a typical legislative session. But what has been happening, I would say, for the last 5 or 6 years is they will reach a point where they will, start to turn on each other and get mad at each other. And it's usually around something to do with race. And it's, as I say in the piece, if someone walked into the Alabama legislature today and they'd never been in the place before, they didn't know anything about Alabama politics, the first thing they'd probably see is that we have a predominantly white party and we have a predominantly black party. But for 2 or 3 exceptions, they are a white party and a black party. And I think lawmakers sometimes think they're talking about partisan issues and suddenly find that they're talking about racial issues and they don't really know how to handle that. And things go off the tracks. We saw that happen last year with a riot bill. It was a bill that Alan Treadway brought to basically make rioting even more illegal than it already was. And the bill would have done things like, make it a felony to block a state highway as part of a protest. Well, the Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March was a protest on a state highway, right? And there are lawmakers saying this would have made felons out of all the Selma voting rights marchers. Like, what are you doing here? And it's becoming more and more of an issue, and feelings there have gotten more and more raw over time. And into the mix of this, we had, as everybody could see it coming, this CRT issue and this CRT bill. There were a number of them, but they settled on one that was really a sort of a cherry bomb in the chicken coop this year. And the session is not over yet, but it remains to be seen how far this bill is going to go. But there's still a good chance that this bill will make it into law.
Well, and something that we need to remember is that this bill doesn't necessarily only focus on CRT. This is not necessarily saying CRT is not going to be taught in the classrooms. This is a broader bill. This is about, I believe you say in your piece, divisive concept. So tell us a little bit about that and kind of how CRT was enveloped in this. Why is this not a CRT bill? Why is this something that is broader?
Well, as I talk about in the piece, there's anytime we write about critical race theory now, there's sort of this moment where we turn down the lights and we turn on the overhead projector and look over our reading glasses and say, well, actually, critical race theory is a academic framework used in higher level law school classes and doesn't have anything to do with anything that's being taught in K through 12 education. And yeah, we get it now, right? Like this critical race theory has been sort of co-opted as a title or as a name for other issues that the proponents of CRT bans don't want taught in schools. And so, it doesn't really have anything to do with these sort of higher level concepts that are being taught in law schools and some graduate courses. So part of what I wanted to do with this piece is like, okay, so what is it that we're really talking about? What is really happening here? And you look at the bill, and it says things like, it won't be permitted in schools to teach that one race is better than another. Well, okay, I'd kind of hope that we were already there. So what is it that they're really fighting over? And I think to understand what the CRT ban is, and I'm very usefully using that name, you have to look at political advertising that is being used in Alabama and elsewhere right now, including by our governor, Kay Ivey. Now, Kay Ivey sits on the State Board of Education, which last year passed another so-called CRT ban, even though it focused on divisive concepts and did not itself use the words critical race theory or CRT. And in fact, state officials have said this doesn't actually ban the teaching of CRT. And yet, Governor Ivey is on television with campaign ads saying, I ban CRT. We're not letting this racist CRT into our classroom because of this ban. Okay, so this thing that's not a CRT ban in practice is a CRT ban in this sort of political space. And then again, we have the governor who's saying that she's banned this thing, right? And here comes the Alabama legislature trying to ban it again. And it's really Alfred Hitchcock said in every movie, he likes to have a MacGuffin, which is like this little, it's like the Ark of the Covenant in Raiders of the Lost Ark, or, it's whatever the little gadget is that everybody's going to fight over in the story. And that's what this bill has become. It's really become a football for them to play out, some sort of political issue here and score points on each other, even though the bill itself doesn't really do anything. But on the other side of this, you have Black lawmakers who, as we were just talking about, for years have stood up at times and said, hey, we would like to be heard. We really need you to understand what it is like from our perspective living in Alabama and understand how this affects us. And as we saw the week before spring break, one after another of these lawmakers stood up in the Alabama House and expressed their misgivings about this. And the Republican majority said, yeah, we're going to do it anyway. And for them, I think this has really become a struggle for significance. It's become a struggle for relevance. It's a struggle to be heard. And it's very personal for them. And what we saw before the spring break is deeply divided of a state legislature, and as emotionally raw as I've ever seen it.
Well, and something that I thought was interesting is this seems to be kind of boiling down almost to a battle of respect over especially the Black
Right.
lawmakers in the Alabama legislature versus the white lawmakers, and especially the white Republican lawmakers. And you tell a small story in this piece that I think bears repeating, and just because of its relevance to this. And you talk about the Black lawmakers wanting their chance to speak. This goes right to that. And this deals with Representative John Rogers going and being promised that he was going to have time to speak at a hearing. He shows up, I believe you said 1 or 2 minutes late past the exact time the committee hearing was supposed to start, and it was over. He didn't have the chance to speak. So he was promised a chance to speak. And the kind of technicality there was, I guess he could have spoken if he was there, but it was done in a way to where he wasn't there. So explain that a little bit.
Well, I mean, he was promised he would have as much time to debate this as he wanted, and there were actually 3 hearings. He was made that promise by the chairman, Chris Pringle, in the first of the 3 committee hearings. Typically, the way things work in the Alabama legislature is you have one hearing where it's called a public hearing, where you, me, anybody else can sign up and go speak to a bill. There's a second hearing or second committee meeting on an issue where the lawmakers will discuss things among themselves. And at the end of that, they will either vote to carry over a bill. They very rarely just vote one down. It's almost unheard of that they just kill one outright. They will either vote to carry it over, which usually means it's dead, or they will give it a favorable report, which sends it to the House or Senate floor, whichever body we're in. Well, this time, that second hearing happened. It got very emotional, very raw. Representative Hollis used a dirty word, which I won't use here, saying that she's tired of this stuff. And they carried the bill over. And 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, that means that bill is dead. Well, there was a caucus meeting shortly after that. And what do you know? This bill is brought back up in committee. And before anybody gets a chance to say a word about it, they call the roll, they declare a quorum, they move for a favorable report, and on a voice vote, they pass it out before the 2 black lawmakers who are there could just even say, whoa, 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 what's going on? Like it wasn't even 60 seconds. It was more like 50. I think I timed it at 53 seconds is how long that committee meeting lasted. And it's that kind of like brunt force, whatever it takes, kind of, we're not even going to stop to listen tactics that I think black lawmakers have gotten tired of. They're sick of it. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what there is that they can really do about it.
Kyle, I think that it's worth saying their CRT, critical race theory, some people see that and they just immediately recoil at this point. This has become such a divisive word, such a divisive acronym in the time that we live in now. And I do think there will be people that see your story, at least see the headline and say, I'm tired of CRT. I'm not reading about it anymore. I'm done with it. But it seems like this is way bigger than just CRT. So what would you say to people who say, look, I either agree with my children being taught CRT, which we know is, again, not something that's taught in grade schools, but saying, I agree with it, I disagree with it, I've made up my mind. Would you encourage them to get in and dig a little bit deeper and see why this is not just necessarily about this one educational theory?
Well, I would invite them to listen to what Representative Mike Ball, a Republican from Madison, Alabama, said. I mean, he was sort of the lone voice of Republican dissent in the Alabama House over this. Now, not surprisingly, Mike Ball is not running for re-election, and he's just kind of tired of the red meat issues. And he stood up in one of these committee meetings and stood up on the House floor and said, look, we have a spiritual problem here. And even if, and he tried to be as empathetic and as sympathetic toward the bill sponsors as possible. He said, look, I know you think you're trying to do the right thing here, but if you try to do this by force, it's not going to work. True reconciliation begins with empathy. It begins with listening. It begins, by talking about this with people who are not just like you. And, he called it a spiritual problem that does not have a legislative solution. And I think that's at the heart of what's wrong, even with the people who are bringing these CRT bills and are pursuing this issue with the best intent, is they're not listening to people who are on the other side of it, who have experiences with racism and have been on the butt end of racism. And it's hard to take that action seriously if it's not starting from a point that is inclusive of everybody.
Seems like this is a topic that is not going to be solved overnight, and is also, again, one that would benefit, as you said, that Representative Ball kind of reiterated that everybody needs to do a little bit more listening. So, Kyle, I think everybody could benefit from this fascinating article. Again, we're going to link it here. This is part of the State of Denial series, which is, again, called State of Denial, How 150 Years of Whitewashing History Poisons Alabama Today. You can find all of that on AL.com. And again, Kyle, thank you so much for your insight here, for breaking this down. I know that we will be talking about this for quite a bit to come. So thank you.
Thank you, Ivana.
Everybody watching, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow.